In a blaze that lit the desert sky, a humble cowboy risked everything to rescue two towering women engulfed by fire, giant protectors of a powerful tribe. Through smoke and heat, he pulled them to safety, unaware that destiny was watching. At sunrise, the chief arrived with an army stretching across the canyon, and with a declaration that would echo for generations, he granted the cowboy a reward so extraordinary it defied belief and reshaped the frontier forever. Night had fallen heavy upon the desert, thick, breathless, and black as judgment. The stars above were distant, cold witnesses to the kind of suffering only the earth itself could remember. Out there, where sand met sorrow, a lone rider cut through the dark. His name was Illy Granger, a poor cowboy whose boots carried more dust than dreams. The wind had turned strange that night. It came crawling low, carrying with it the smell of smoke, thick, bitter, alive. Illy slowed his horse, a tired roan with ribs showing like old fence rails. The beast pawed at the dirt, uneasy, and then Illy saw it. A glow on the horizon, not the warm kind that meant campfire or company. No, this was a violent orange that danced and twisted, a fire devouring the night. He urged the horse forward. Each step drew him closer to the roar. The desert was alive with sound now, crackling wood, splitting air, the mournful scream of something caught in the blaze. When Illy reached the ridge, he stopped. Below him, a wagon was burning, wheels half melted, canvas turned to cinders, flames lashed at the sky like angry spirits. He squinted through the smoke, covering his mouth with a torn sleeve. For a heartbeat, it was just fire and emptiness. Then movement, shapes inside the inferno, one, two, large as shadows from a nightmare. Illy's gut tightened. He didn't think, didn't pray, just moved. He kicked the roan down the slope and leapt off before it stopped. The heat struck him like a wall, scorching his skin, drying the air in his throat. His boots sank into embers, the soles screaming against the ground. He tore at the wagon's side with his bare hands, boards splitting beneath his grip. Behind the wall of flame he saw them. Two figures bound with rope, slumped together women, but impossibly tall, their limbs thick with muscle, their skin streaked with soot. Their hair caught fire like dry grass, and still they didn't stir. "God help me," Illy muttered, though God hadn't answered him in years. He ripped his coat free, slapping at the flames on their dresses. The ropes were tight, leather hardened by heat. He pulled his knife, the blade dull but desperate, one cut, then another. Sparks fell into his eyes. He coughed, choking, vision blurring. The fire screamed louder now, as if trying to bury them all. Illy dragged the first woman out, heavy as stone, limp as death. He stumbled backward, boots slipping on ash. The second one was still inside, head lolling against the wreckage. Illy went back for her. The roof groaned above, timbers glowing red, ready to collapse. He threw his shoulder under her arm, heaved with every ounce left in him, and pulled her free just as the wagon gave way behind them. They fell together into the sand. The fire swallowed what remained, roaring into the heavens. Illy lay there, chest heaving, lungs seared raw. The night smelled of burnt flesh and sorrow. The women didn't move. Their skin shimmered faintly under the dying firelight, carved with strange marks, symbols that looked older than the desert itself. Illy pressed his ear to the first one's chest. A heartbeat, slow, deep, distant. Like thunder far away. The second weaker, but still there. He rolled onto his back, staring at the stars now blurred by smoke. For the first time in years, Illy whispered into the night, "Not tonight, Lord. Don't take him tonight." The wind answered with a low moan, sweeping over the dunes, lifting ashes into the air like dark snow. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled a slow promise that the night wasn't over. And as Illy knelt between the two giants he'd pulled from the fire, the flames behind him began to die. But the fire within his soul had just begun to burn. The world had quieted, but not in peace. The fire still crackled behind him, a beast dying slow, whispering its last curses to the sand. The roan stood off in the distance, nostrils flaring, eyes wide, watching its master kneel between the two women he had torn from death's grasp. Illy's hands shook as he reached for his canteen. The metal burned his fingers, still hot from his run through the blaze. He poured water over the first woman's face. Steam rose from her skin, and the smell of smoke and sweat filled the air. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes dark as obsidian, glimmering with something both human and wild. But she didn't speak. Her breath was shallow, labored. He turned to the other one, taller, stronger, her body marked with strange blue ink that caught the faint light. Her pulse was slower, deeper, as if beating from another world. He tore a piece of his shirt and pressed it against a gash on her shoulder, whispering rough words of comfort that even he didn't believe. The wind shifted. It carried the smell of rain and blood. Illy lifted his head, nothing but miles of desert, a horizon cut sharp by the moon. The silence pressed down, heavy as guilt. He made a small camp from what was left of his saddle gear, a few pieces of dry brush, the last of his jerky. He coaxed a timid flame from the ashes, enough to chase the cold. The women lay side by side, their breaths uneven, their chests rising like waves too tired to reach the shore. Illy sat beside them, staring into the tiny fire. His mind drifted back not to the blaze, but to another night. Another scream, his wife's face, pale in the light of a burning cabin. His hands too slow, his prayers too late. The fire had taken her, just as it nearly took these women. He had never forgiven himself. Now the desert felt like it was giving him a chance to try again. A faint sound broke through the wind, a cough. The first woman stirred, her lips parting, words escaping like broken whispers. The sacred land, protect the fire. Her voice trembled, then faded into sleep again. Illy leaned closer. Sacred land, he didn't understand. But something in her tone, reverent, fearful, made his spine go cold. He looked at their hands. Their wrists bore markings, carved deep into the skin, not tattoos but brands, ancient symbols of lineage, maybe warning, maybe promise. He poured more water over their wounds. His canteen was nearly empty now. Didn't matter. He'd give it all if it meant they'd live. The sky above was a strange color, the kind that comes before dawn but after death. Smoke still lingered, crawling low along the ground. Far in the distance, coyotes cried, their voices rising like a lament for souls lost in the fire. Illy sat there until his eyelids grew heavy. His body trembled from exhaustion, his throat raw from the smoke. Still, he didn't lie down, he couldn't. He watched the two women breathing, his hand resting on his revolver. He didn't know who they were, didn't know why fate had dropped them into his path. But something deep inside, older than his fear, older than his pain, told him this was no accident. When the first light of dawn broke, the fire behind them had turned to gray ash. The land smelled of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The horizon blushed faintly gold. One of the women's eyes opened again just for a heartbeat. She looked at him, really looked, and a single tear rolled down her soot-streaked cheek. Illy didn't speak, didn't need to. The world felt different now, quieter, heavier, waiting. He turned his gaze eastward, where the sun began to rise over the scorched desert. The flames had spared them, but Illy could feel it in his bones. Fire wasn't done with him yet. And as the wind carried the last whisper of smoke across the plains, the poor cowboy realized the night hadn't ended. It had only changed its shape. Dawn came slow over the desert, pale and trembling, as if the heavens themselves feared what they'd seen in the dark. The fire was gone, nothing left but blackened bones of wood and the smell of sorrow that clung to the wind. Illy Granger sat alone beside the dying coals, his hat in his hands, eyes hollow from a night that had burned through his soul. His horse grazed in silence, steam rising from its back where sweat met the morning chill. The two women still lay where he dragged them from death's grip, wrapped in the scraps of his coat, half covered by the dust he'd thrown to cool their skin. The land was quiet now, too quiet. Not a crow, not a breath, just that faint hum that comes when the desert holds its breath after tragedy. Illy poked the embers with a stick, watching gray flakes drift upward and vanish in the still air. Every spark reminded him of something, the way his wife's cabin had burned, how the light danced on her hair before the smoke took her. the way his own heart had turned to ash that night. He looked toward the women again. They were different now under daylight, their faces strong and noble, not fragile like the ones he'd known in the settlements. Their skin carried a bronze sheen under the soot, and the markings on their arms looked like stories written in fire. One had a scar across her temple that caught the sun like a blade. The other's chest rose and fell steady, but shallow, as if her lungs refused to let go of the smoke. Illy took a breath and whispered, mostly to himself, "You made it through the night, didn't you?" The desert didn't answer, but the faint rustle of sand carried his voice farther than he meant it to go. He poured what little water he had left into a tin cup, lifting one of the women gently and pressing it to her lips. She stirred, her eyes flickering open black as obsidian, reflecting the world like still water. She didn't speak, just watched him with that look of something between gratitude and mourning. When she finally tried to speak, her voice was barely air. Why did you save us?" Illy blinked. The question struck him deep. He didn't have an answer that made sense, not even to himself. He just said the first truth that came to him, "Because no one saved mine." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, then closed again. The wind carried her next words like a ghost sigh. "The sacred lands remember mercy." Illy frowned, not understanding. He looked over her shoulder. The horizon stretched endless, flat, and burned. Sacred lands, he knew this territory, every ridge, every dried-up riverbed. But there was nothing sacred here. Just graves buried under sand. He stood slowly, dusting off his hands. The air was growing warmer, the sun climbing with cruel patience. His throat burned with thirst. He needed water, food, shelter, anything to keep the women alive until they could move. He turned toward the ashes of the wagon. Something glinted there. He walked closer, boots crunching through the wreckage. Beneath a sheet of charred canvas, he found metal shackles, large ones, thick as a man's wrist, still locked tight but twisted by the fire. Chains meant for prisoners, not travelers. His stomach knotted. Whoever these women were, they hadn't been free, and the fire hadn't been an accident. Illy knelt, tracing a finger over the scorched earth. Boot tracks led away from the scene, more than one pair, deep and scattered, heading south. He counted 6, maybe more. Whoever had done this had left in a hurry. He rose and glanced back at the women. Their bodies, though still, carried power, the kind you could feel in the ground, in the silence, in the way even the wind seemed to bow around them. Illy felt something stir inside him, something long buried. Maybe it was guilt, maybe destiny. He didn't know, but he knew this much: whatever fire had tried to claim them wasn't done burning, and now, by saving them, he'd stepped right into its path. The morning sun climbed higher, cutting through the smoke. Shadows shrank back into the earth. Illy packed his few things, checked the revolver at his side, and whispered to the horizon, "If there's more trouble comin', let it find me first." The desert gave no answer. Only the distant roll of thunder, faint, far, and familiar, like the voice of a storm that hadn't forgotten his name. By noon, the heat had risen cruel and sharp, turning the air into glass. The desert shimmered, stretching endless, and Illy Granger felt the weight of more than the sun pressing on his back. Every gust of wind carried the scent of smoke still, as if the fire behind them refused to die, even in memory. He knelt beside the women again, their faces glistening with fevered sweat. One stirred in pain, the other whispered something soft and broken, words that weren't English. Illy listened close, catching only fragments. Naili, Sani, 2 names maybe, or prayers. He poured the last of his water into their lips, his throat aching with thirst, but he didn't care. They needed it more. That's how it always was, him giving, them taking, the world never giving back. Still, he did it, because somewhere inside, the fire that killed his wife had left him hollow enough to make room for mercy. The sun moved slow, dragging its light across the sand like a lazy blade. Flies gathered near the wagon wreck, drawn by death. Illy ignored them. His eyes caught something else, a small pouch half buried near the ashes. He dug it out with his knife and opened it. Inside, charred beads, black stones, and one medallion carved from bone. It bore a symbol he didn't recognize, a sun with 4 lines beneath it, like roots digging into earth. He turned it over in his palm. It was warm, not from the fire, but from something deeper, as if it held the desert's heartbeat inside it. He looked toward the sisters. The same symbol was faintly marked on one of their arms, burned into the skin. Illy's brow furrowed. These weren't ordinary women. Whoever they were, whatever they carried, it was sacred and dangerous. The wind picked up, whistling low through the canyon. Dust danced around him in thin spirals, whispering shapes into the air. Illy stared at the horizon, saw nothing, yet felt everything. The hair on his neck rose. He wasn't alone out here. He gripped his revolver. The desert stayed still for a long while, and then faint, distant came the sound of hooves. Illy froze. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of that approach, slow, steady, getting closer. He turned to the women, both unconscious again, helpless as fallen statues. He couldn't move them, not far. If it was bandits coming back, he'd never stand a chance. He crawled to the wagon's remains, ducked low, eyes scanning the horizon. Then he saw them, 2 riders, far off, silhouettes against the pale heat haze, moving slow, deliberate, watching. Illy stayed silent, hand on his gun, thumb resting on the hammer. He counted breaths. 10, 20. The riders didn't come closer. They just watched from the ridge. Then one of them raised something, a hand, a signal, and they turned away, vanishing into the shimmering distance. Illy exhaled, the sound trembling in his throat. "What in God's name's going on out here?" he muttered. He crawled back to the women. The taller one's breathing had steadied, her face calm now, though streaked with soot. Illy brushed a lock of burned hair from her cheek. "You're safe now," he whispered, unsure if he believed it. The sky began to dim again, the heat fading into that strange stillness that comes before the desert decides whether to sleep or storm. Illy gathered what brush he could, sparked a small flame, and sat near it. He stared into the fire, his reflection flickering in the orange glow, tired eyes, cracked lips, and the face of a man still running from something that had already caught him. Behind him, one of the women stirred again. Her voice came softer this time, almost kind. "You are not from this land." Illy turned, startled. "No," he said quietly, "just passin' through." She looked at him for a long moment, eyes heavy with something like knowing. "The fire calls to those who run from their ghosts," she murmured, then fell back into silence. Illy sat still for a while, her words echoing in the air long after her voice was gone. The wind began to howl through the rocks, carrying with it the scent of rain that never came. As night fell again, the cowboy looked to the sky, to stars dimmed by smoke and memory. The world had changed in one night of fire, and as he sat there, guarding 2 strangers born of flame and mystery, Illy Granger felt it deep in his bones. The ashes around him weren't just from the past. They were a beginning, and in their weight, something ancient was stirring, waiting to rise. The dawn came quiet. Too quiet. The smell of smoke still lingered in the wind, whispering what the night had tried to erase. As the first light touched the charred remains of the forest edge, the cowboy stirred awake, his hat still shading eyes that hadn't seen peace in years. Beside him lay 2 figures, taller than any woman he had ever seen. Their skin, painted with the ashes of survival, shimmered beneath the morning glow. They breathed now, slow, steady. Alive, he knelt beside them, brushing the soot from one's cheek. Her pulse was faint, but strong enough to tell him something. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters. He looked around. The world was still burning at the edges, but the birds had begun to sing again. Even the earth seemed to exhale, as if grateful the night hadn't taken them all. The taller of the 2 women opened her eyes, dark, fierce, and full of questions. For a long, trembling moment neither spoke. Then she whispered in a language he didn't know, yet somehow understood. She asked, "Why did you save us?" The cowboy didn't answer. He just tipped his hat lower, reached for his canteen, and offered her water. Because in his world, saving someone didn't need explaining. It was just what decent men did when the world turned cruel. But as she drank, something shifted in her gaze. a mix of gratitude, awe, and something that looked almost like fear. For she knew the man before her had just stepped into a story that wasn't his. And in their tribe, such stories never ended the way a man expected. The sun had climbed higher now, spreading gold across the valley. The cowboy gathered what was left of his supplies, a torn blanket, a half-burned rope, and a flask that had seen better days. The two women stood beside him, towering, proud even in their weakness. Their clothes were singed, their feet bare, their eyes tracing every movement he made. At last, the elder one spoke again, her voice deep, almost melodic. She said her name was Tala, daughter of the Eagle clan. The younger, quieter one bowed her head and whispered, Nita, her sister. The cowboy nodded slow, letting their names settle in his chest like old secrets. Tala pointed toward the northern ridge, where the land rose into jagged rock and shadow. That was where their people lived or had lived before the flames came in the night. Their village, gone, their kin, scattered like dust in the wind. The cowboy didn't ask what caused it. He'd seen too many towns burn, too many stories end the same way: greed, vengeance, or fear. He just said, "We'll head north then." Tala's eyes narrowed. "You would walk with us, our path is cursed." He gave a small, crooked grin. "Ma'am, I've been cursed long before sunrise." Nita smiled faintly the first time since the fire. Something about his calm defiance made her believe, just for a moment, that not all men were built for taking. Some were built for standing beside. So they began their slow walk through the valley, a wounded cowboy and two giant sisters, bound by a night of fire and a silence that spoke louder than words. None of them knew what waited beyond those hills. But somewhere above, the buzzards turned wide circles as if they already knew. The story was far from done. The sun hung low over the plains, a bruised orange spilling across mesas and canyons, as if the sky itself had been wounded by the fire that passed through the desert. Dust swirled around Illy Granger's boots, a ghostly veil that whispered of the miles he had traveled and the choices yet to be made. The sisters walked beside him, their long strides measured, deliberate. Even wounded, they carried a presence that commanded the land, shadows stretching behind them like the echoes of giants. Tala's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, wary of the faintest movement. Nita's hands traced the air, as if feeling the invisible threads of the desert, sensing what Illy could not. The cowboy had heard the rumors from the settlers days ago, murmurs of Apache riders seeking vengeance, searching for the women who had survived the night of fire. They warned him give them up or die alongside them. He had not answered. He could not. They reached a shallow creek, water clear and trembling beneath the last rays of sun. Illy knelt, cupping water in his hands, offering it first to the sisters. They drank silently, their eyes never leaving the distant horizon. In that moment, Illy saw the truth. They were not merely survivors. They were the heart of something larger, something older than himself. The wind carried faint voices from the north, whispers of a tribe rising, carrying the scent of smoke and steel. Illy's hand drifted to his revolver, thumb resting on the hammer. But it was not fear that clenched his chest, it was choice. He looked at the sisters. Nita's gaze held a question, unspoken, heavy with trust. Tala's jaw tightened, a silent plea buried beneath pride. He realized then, to turn them over would be to betray not just them, but every ounce of courage that had carried him through fire and ash. Illy straightened, dust falling from his coat, shoulders squared beneath the crimson sky. He did not speak of danger. He did not plead with fate. He only nodded once to himself, to them, to the wind that seemed to listen. 3 torches appeared in the distance that night, moving slow, deliberate. Riders watching, waiting. Illy's horse shifted nervously, nostrils flaring at the scent of strangers, and the sisters tensed beside him. He placed a hand on Tala's shoulder. She met his gaze, understanding flashing between them without a word. Then he turned his eyes forward, facing the approaching figures with a calm born of fire-tested resolve. The night would not forgive them, nor the plains. But for the first time, Illy Granger felt he was standing not as a man haunted by the past, but as a guardian chosen by circumstance, by mercy, by something older than vengeance itself. And in that twilight beneath the bruised sky, he knew the choice had been made. He would not abandon them, not tonight, not ever. Darkness descended over the plains, swallowing the crimson of sunset and leaving the world half seen, half imagined. Shadows stretched like long fingers, creeping across rocks and sand. The 3 torches on the distant ridge grew brighter, flickering against the horizon like hungry eyes. Illy Granger stood firm, the sisters at his sides, their presence a quiet storm of power and silent defiance. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of iron and sweat. From the ridge, the silhouettes of riders became clearer, warriors mounted on horses that moved like living shadows, their weapons catching the faint light. Illy's hand rested on his revolver, the grip familiar and grounding, but it was more than firepower that steadied him now. It was the knowledge of why he stood there, mercy, courage, and the unspoken bond forged in the heat of the night's flames. Tala's gaze swept across the approaching figures, sharp and calculating. Nita's hands hovered over the air, sensing the rhythm of the earth, as if the desert itself whispered warnings only she could understand. Illy swallowed the lump in his throat, letting their confidence seep into his own veins. He didn't speak, no words could capture the weight of what was about to come. The torches neared, and with each measured step of the horses, the tension thickened, pressing down on the plains like a living thing. Illy could hear the faint clink of armor, the soft creak of saddles, the whisper of reins against leather. He counted them silently, 7 riders, moving with precision, disciplined and deadly. They weren't ordinary men. They were hunters, tracking prey with the certainty of the inevitable. Tala stepped forward, her voice a low hum that vibrated through the desert air. "They will test you, Cowboy. They do not forgive weakness." Illy nodded once, understanding the warning without need for translation. The wind carried it all, the threat, the pride, the memory of fire that had tried to claim these women. He clenched his jaw and lifted his gaze to meet the eyes of the first rider who had broken from the line, daring to step closer. The silence stretched, broken only by the desert itself, the rustle of sand, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of heat rising from the cracked earth. Then the riders halted, and the torches cast long, jagged shadows that danced like spirits over the plains. Illy shifted, moving slightly to position himself between the sisters and the approaching danger. Every instinct screamed to flee, to surrender, to save himself, but he did not. The night had already claimed enough, and he would not allow it to claim these women as well. One rider dismounted, stepping forward, the torchlight illuminating a face hardened by years of conflict. He spoke in a language Illy did not know, words sharp as the steel at his hip. Tala and Nita answered in kind, voices rising and falling in a cadence Illy could only feel, not understand. The tension thrummed like a live wire between them all. Illy adjusted his stance, letting the firelight play across his features. He did not understand their words, but he understood the meaning. They were testing him, probing the strength of his resolve, the weight of his choice. And he would not flinch. Hours passed in measured silence, the desert holding its breath along with him. The torches eventually faded as the riders withdrew into the darkness, leaving only the echo of hooves and the faint shimmer of sweat on their backs. The sisters exhaled, their tension loosening slightly, and Illy allowed himself a small, weary nod. The night was still, the air heavy with anticipation. Illy looked to the sky, where stars glittered cold and distant, and realized the choice he had made beneath the crimson sun was now bound to the rising night. He would stand with them, through fire, through ash, and through the trials yet to come, and as the desert whispered around them, he felt it a promise, unspoken, unyielding. The storm was coming, but he would not turn away. The sun had climbed high, burning fierce and unrelenting, scattering the shadows of the plains. Dust whipped through the canyon passes, curling like ghost fingers across the scorched earth. Illy Granger moved with cautious purpose, the sisters at his side, their strides slow but commanding. The air itself seemed thick with secrets, each grain of sand a whisper of histories too long buried. They walked in silence for miles, the only sound the soft thrum of the horses' hooves against cracked soil. The sisters measured breathing and Illy's own pulse, steadying against the weight of the unknown. Even in their quiet, he could feel the pull of something larger, a truth too heavy to name, resting beneath their skin, in the symbols burned into their arms, and in the way the desert seemed to lean toward them as if in recognition. At last, the sisters paused near a shallow rock ledge where the wind slowed, carrying only the faint smell of sage and ash. Tala turned to Illy, her eyes sharp as flint, and gestured for him to sit beside the ledge. Nita knelt, tracing lines in the dust with her fingers, moving as if unlocking memories the world had tried to bury. They were not simple travelers. Tala said, voice low, almost reverent, "We are daughters of a chieftain. Our father killed, our lands betrayed." Illy's brow furrowed. Betrayed? How? She did not answer immediately, only looked toward the horizon, where the heat shimmered like a curtain between them and the distant mesas. By our own, by those who coveted power, who feared the blood that binds us, the fire that sought to take us. It was no accident, it was a purge. Nita's gaze met his, calm yet intense, the kind of gaze that sees the truth of a man without asking. "You saved more than our lives," she said. "You saved the reckoning of our people." Illy swallowed hard, the weight of their words settling deep in his chest. He thought of the night of flames, of the chains, of the fire that had tried to claim them, and realized that his small act of mercy had thrown him into a world larger than himself. A world of vengeance, of prophecy, and of destiny bound to blood and dust. The sisters spoke of the Eagle Clan, a tribe once thought scattered, their power buried by time and betrayal. The markings on their skin were not mere decoration, but symbols of inheritance, of promise, of a justice long delayed. Illy traced the symbols with his eyes, trying to commit every line to memory, though he could not yet understand their meaning. As the wind picked up again, carrying dust like fine ash across the ledge, Tala spoke of their enemies' rival chiefs who had sought to claim the sacred lands and erase their lineage. She spoke of fire, blood, and the law of the tribe that demanded retribution for every wrong. Illy listened, silent. He had faced bandits, rustlers, even the desert's wrath, but nothing had ever carried this kind of weight. He understood, finally, that he was no longer merely a cowboy wandering through the plains. He was now the guardian of something ancient, something that could ignite the world if mishandled. For a long while they remained there, the three of them bound in quiet contemplation. The sun climbed, shadows shrinking under its relentless gaze, yet the dust carried whispers of secrets not yet spoken. Illy realized the truth. Survival had been only the beginning, and somewhere, deep beneath the red stones and the wind-swept sands, the echoes of betrayal waited to rise again. The sisters looked to him then, eyes fierce, commanding. Tala's voice was steady. "We must move before they return. The dust carries their scent." Illy nodded, hand tightening around his revolver, heart steadying against the storm to come. The weight of ash and secrets pressed upon them all, but he felt for the first time a clarity that the fire which had saved them had also chosen him. And as they stepped forward, the desert seemed to lean toward them, whispering of justice, vengeance, and the reckoning yet to come. The desert air was heavy with dust and heat, each step stirring whispers from the ground, echoes of a past that refused to be buried. Illy Granger led the sisters through a narrow pass where the wind cut sharp, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of blood and iron. The silence between them was thick, weighted with unspoken questions and the knowledge that their enemies were not far behind. Tala glanced over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. "The rival chief. He believes us dead," she said, voice low, controlled, but carrying the weight of anger that had smoldered for years. He does not know that mercy has chosen its own instrument. Ili's hand rested on his revolver. He had saved many in his life, but none like this. These women were not only survivors. They were symbols of vengeance, of justice yet unclaimed. Every scar, every mark on their skin, spoke of battles fought and lost, and of a power waiting to awaken. Nita touched her sister's arm lightly, a silent reassurance. Then, almost as if compelled by the desert itself, she spoke of the prophecy their elders had whispered, words older than any settlement. He who saves the daughters of the eagle will walk a path of fire and shadow, she murmured. The spirits of the land mark him. He cannot turn away. Ili felt the truth in her words deep in his chest. He had thought his life simple, ruled by the rhythm of horse hooves and the law of survival. But now he realized that the fire, the ash, and the shadows of the night had chosen him for something greater, something dangerous. The sisters led him to a hidden alcove, shaded by jagged rocks. From here, they could see the valley stretching below, blackened by fire, silent except for the whisper of the wind. Tala knelt, tracing patterns in the dirt with her fingers, as if reading messages left by ancestors long gone. Nita stood behind her, eyes scanning the horizon, alert to every movement, every sound that might signal pursuit. They will come, Tala said, her voice a steady drumbeat of certainty, and when they do, they will find us ready. Ili looked at them both, their faces illuminated by the harsh sunlight, proud and unyielding. He realized the truth he had been avoiding. This was no longer just about survival. This was about standing for something greater, something that demanded courage beyond bullets and horses. A distant shadow moved along the ridge, too deliberate to be wind, too fast to be an illusion. Ili's heart quickened. He motioned for the sisters to stay low, feeling the familiar weight of his revolver in his hand. The enemy was near, and the desert itself seemed tense, holding its breath. For a long moment they waited, silent and still, the wind carrying the smell of dust and smoke. Then the first horse appeared over the ridge, its rider poised like a predator, scanning the ground below. Ili felt the surge of adrenaline, but also a strange calm, a sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. The sisters exchanged a brief glance, unspoken communication flowing between them. Tala nodded slightly, a signal. Nita flexed her hands, ready. Ili adjusted his stance, feeling the desert hum beneath him, the weight of the past and the promise of vengeance pressing down equally. And then, with the sun high and merciless above, the first rider descended into the valley, unaware that he had just stepped into the path of a storm, a reckoning born of fire, ash, and the courage of those who refused to surrender. The dance had begun, and Ili Granger knew there would be no turning back. The secrets beneath the dust were rising, and with them, a tide of justice long delayed, ready to sweep the plains clean. The sky had darkened early, swollen with thunderclouds that rolled low across the canyon walls. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the jagged cliffs and sending shadows dancing like restless spirits over the desert floor. Rain began to fall in sharp, cold sheets, hissing against the dry earth and soaking the cowboy's coat, plastering his hair to his forehead. Ili Granger stood at the edge of the canyon, revolver in hand, eyes fixed on the approaching figures. The wind tore through the plain, carrying the scent of wet sand, gunpowder, and fear. His horse had bolted hours before, leaving him on foot, but he felt no panic. His muscles tensed, his breath measured. He was no stranger to danger, but this was something far beyond ordinary peril. The riders came in a disciplined line, the rain glinting off their weapons and the edges of their saddles. 7 of them, then 10 more emerging from the mist. Their intent was clear: take the sisters and kill anyone who dared stand in their path. Tala and Nita stood beside him, unarmed but fierce, towering and resolute. Blood from earlier wounds had begun to sting, yet they didn't flinch. Their eyes, dark and piercing, held a fire that mirrored the lightning above, a warning to all who dared threaten them. Ili's finger rested lightly on the hammer. He did not speak. Words were useless in the presence of death, and tonight death moved swift and sure across the canyon floor. The first shot rang out, echoing against the cliffs, followed by another. Sparks of flint met steel as the world erupted into chaos. Rain lashed across faces, washing away sweat, soot, and the dust of the plains, but not the determination that anchored them. Illy moved like a shadow, ducking behind rocks, returning fire with precise, practiced calm. Bullets screamed past, tearing through air and stone, yet the cowboy's aim never faltered. A rider fell, horse and man collapsing into the mud with a sickening thud. The sisters moved with uncanny grace, weaving between rocks, their height and strength turning them into living barricades. Tala swung a fallen branch with the force of a battering ram, knocking a rider sideways into the dirt. Nita's kick sent another crashing to the ground, her scream of rage blending with the storm above. The world became a blur of lightning and blood, of mud and fire. Illy's revolver roared again and again, the metallic taste of fear and rain heavy in his mouth. Each second stretched into eternity, and yet, in the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a reckoning. When the last shot rang out, silence fell like a heavy blanket, broken only by the steady drum of rain. Illy's boots squelched in mud, horse dead at his side. One of the sisters limped, wounded but alive. He crouched beside her, pressing a hand to her arm, feeling the warmth of life stubbornly clinging to her skin. Somewhere, deep in the storm, a quiet acknowledgement seemed to rise the spirits of the land, the echoes of ancestors watching. Illy had stood his ground, not for gold or glory, but for a debt written in fire and blood. And in that heavy silence, broken only by rain, he realized the truth. The desert had claimed nothing tonight, because he had chosen to face the storm, and in doing so, had earned a debt that could never be repaid, a blood debt owed to those who walk with honor. Even when the world demands surrender, the rain pounded harder now, turning the canyon floor into a river of mud, carrying the scent of iron and wet earth. Lightning ripped the sky apart, illuminating the aftermath of the skirmish, fallen riders, overturned horses, and the hissing of fire smoldering against the soaked timber of the old brush. Illy Granger stood among the chaos, chest heaving, boots sinking into the quagmire beneath him. The sisters were battered, bruised, but alive. Tala clutched her side, blood streaking through the rain, yet her eyes burned with unyielding fury. Nita had a deep gash along her thigh, the crimson mixing with the mud, but she did not falter. Together, they were a living testament to survival, their spirits untouchable even by the storm and the men who had sought to end them. Illy knelt beside them, pressing a makeshift bandage to Nita's wound, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. The weight of what had just occurred settled in his chest, the realization that tonight had been more than a fight. It had been a declaration. Mercy and courage could stand against hatred and death. Somewhere in the canyon, distant thunder rolled, a low warning of storms yet to come. Illy's gaze drifted upward, where the jagged cliffs loomed like silent witnesses. He felt it then, a presence, unseen but undeniable. The desert had marked him tonight, silently acknowledging his stand. Whatever path lay ahead, he was now tied to the sisters, bound to the law of their land, to their bloodline, and to the fire that had chosen him as protector. Tala straightened, wincing but proud, her eyes meeting Illy's with a mixture of gratitude and command. "You have the courage of men long gone," she said, voice steady against the roar of rain. "The spirits of the land recognize you, even if you do not yet understand why." Nita, still breathing heavily, managed a faint smile. "They will speak to you," she whispered, "when the time comes." Illy nodded, understanding only in part, but certain of one thing. The world had shifted tonight. The balance of life and death, of vengeance and mercy, had tilted, and he had chosen where he stood. The storm began to ease, rain softening to a drizzle, and the first pale light of dawn began to pierce through the heavy clouds. Illy helped the sisters to their feet, steadying them as they moved through the mud-slicked canyon. The air was cool, fresh, carrying the faint scent of sage and damp stone. For a moment the world seemed still, holding its breath after the chaos. And in that stillness, Illy Granger realized that the blood spilled tonight was not just the cost of survival, it was the beginning of a path that would lead them all into the heart of justice, vengeance, and a reckoning written in fire, rain, and the dust of the plains. They continued forward, step by weary step, toward the unknown. But in each stride there was a promise unspoken. They would not falter, and neither would he. The desert had tested him, and he had answered not with fear, but with defiance, and the quiet, unyielding strength of a man who had learned what it truly meant to honor a blood debt. The sun bled red across the horizon, setting the plains ablaze with firelight that mirrored the fury in the hearts of those who walked them. Shadows stretched long and jagged, echoing the promise of violence that hovered like smoke over the mesas. Illy Granger rode at the edge of the sisters' march, his boots pressing into the soft soil, revolver strapped and ready, eyes sharp against the crimson sky. Tala and Nita moved like storms themselves, their presence undeniable. The wounds from the last battle still marked them, blood dried into patterns on skin and cloth, yet they carried themselves with the quiet authority of women who had faced death and returned. The plains trembled beneath their steps, as though the earth itself acknowledged their wrath and purpose. From the distance, the rival chiefs' encampment became visible. Tents stretched across the valley floor, men moving like ants beneath flickering torches. Smoke rose, curling in spirals against the darkening sky, carrying the scent of cooked meat, oil, and something fouler, the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. Illy spurred his horse forward, feeling the pulse of the desert in his veins, the rhythm of 100 battles running through his memory. He did not hesitate. He knew that tonight would decide more than life or death. It would shape the future of the Eagle clan, the desert, and perhaps even his own destiny. Tala raised a hand, stopping him. Her eyes, dark and piercing, met his. "We enter not as victims," she said, voice carrying over the wind, "but as reckoners. Remember this, Cowboy, we do not merely fight, we judge." Nita's gaze swept across the valley, calculating, measuring. She crouched slightly, scanning every movement of the rival men, every glint of metal, every shadow that could hide a knife. Illy followed her lead, understanding that their fight was as much about strategy as it was about fury. First volley of fire came as the sun sank behind the cliffs, casting the valley in an amber twilight. Shots rang out, echoing against the rock walls, mingling with the roar of horses and the cries of men. Illy ducked, firing with precision, each shot a whisper of defiance in the storm of chaos. The sisters moved with a terrifying grace. Tala swung a fallen pole like a battering ram, sending 2 men crashing into the dust. Nita's kick toppled another, her strength amplified by the rage burning in her veins. Their wounds slowed them not at all. The fire inside them had become unstoppable. Illy pressed forward, moving between them, covering their flanks. His revolver, speaking in staccato bursts against the night. The storm of battle was deafening. Mud, blood, rain, and smoke, twisting together into a maelstrom of violence that seemed to shake the very plains. And yet, even amid the chaos, Illy saw the pattern, the way the sisters moved, how they anticipated the enemy's strikes, how the desert itself seemed to bend around them, shaping the battlefield to their will. The rival chief, a tall man with a cruel, calculating gaze, appeared on a rise above his men, watching the carnage unfold. His arrogance faltered only for a moment as he recognized the fury of the women who had survived fire, betrayal, and now the reckoning of the plains itself. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the battlefield, and Illy felt the undeniable truth settle in him. This night, this fight, was not merely for survival. It was for justice, for vengeance, and for the honor of a bloodline long denied. He drew a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of war pulse through him, and pressed forward into the storm, ready to stand beside them as the plains themselves bore witness to the reckoning. The crimson sky deepened to bruised purple, shadows stretching long over the valley as firelight and smoke painted the battlefield in hellish strokes. Illy Granger moved alongside the sisters, mud and blood slick on boots and hands, heart pounding to the rhythm of chaos. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder, scorched earth, and the acrid tang of fear, yet fear had no place here. Tala and Nita were unstoppable, embodiments of wrath and precision. Tala's swings sent men sprawling, limbs twisting in the dust, while Nita's strikes, swift and calculated, toppled those who thought strength alone could prevail. Every move they made seemed preordained, as if the desert itself guided them, lending power to their fury. Illy's revolver roared in short, controlled bursts, bullets meeting the thunder of hooves and the screams of those who underestimated the wrath of the wronged. His horse lay dead hours before, but he moved with a predator's grace, every step purposeful, every breath measured. He had become part of their storm, the quiet center of an unrelenting whirlwind. The rival chief tried to rally his men, shouting commands that were swallowed by the roar of battle and the clash of steel. His eyes widened as he saw the sisters, still tall and imposing, still unbroken, their wounds forgotten in the fire of vengeance. They were no longer just survivors. They were the embodiment of justice incarnate. Tala's cry split the night, a wordless scream that carried across the valley, freezing men in place, striking terror into hearts hardened by years of conquest. Nita's voice rose in harmony, a chorus of righteous fury, echoing off the canyon walls like a storm. Illy felt a shiver run through him. The desert itself seemed to quake in response. One by one, the chief's men fell, toppled by the sisters, by Illy, by the inevitability of retribution. The last of the torches flickered out, and in the dim light, the rival chief realized the depth of his failure. His ambition, his cruelty, his calculated betrayal, all undone by a cowboy and two sisters who refused to bow to fear. Finally, the chief himself stumbled, surrounded by smoke and the echo of their wrath. He fell not by sword alone, but by the fire that had always marked their path, the fire of justice that consumes greed, arrogance, and betrayal. Illy's breath came hard, wet with rain and sweat, but he stood tall, eyes never leaving the sisters. They had claimed victory, but the price had been carved into their flesh and soul. Tala lowered her arms, chest heaving, eyes scanning the field for any remaining threat. Nita touched her sister's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their triumph, yet no celebration came. The storm had passed, but the reckoning lingered, heavy in the air, etched into the canyon walls. Illy looked at them, feeling a weight he could not name. They had survived fire, betrayal, and battle, and in doing so had forged a bond with him that went beyond gratitude. The desert had marked him, the sisters had claimed him as ally, and the blood debt he had earned now carried a promise heavier than any coin, that they would stand together, come what may. Thunder rumbled far above, a low, distant drumbeat, and the rain softened to a drizzle. The valley lay quiet, smoke curling in lazy spirals, the bodies of the fallen scattered like shadows fading with the light. The sisters turned to Illy, eyes sharp and unwavering, and for the first time he understood the truth that had been whispered by wind, fire, and blood. Courage, once offered without question, becomes legend. And as they walked forward, leaving the valley of reckoning behind, Illy felt the storm within him finally settle, replaced by a solemn certainty that the path ahead would be forged by honor, by fire, and by the unbroken will of those who refused to kneel. Dawn broke slowly over the valley, pale and golden, filtering through the mist that clung stubbornly to the canyon floor. The air smelled of wet earth, sage, and smoke from the night's fire. Illy Granger stood beside the sisters, mud, caked and weary, yet the storm of yesterday's battle had left a strange calm in its wake. Every step forward carried the weight of what had been done and what was yet to come. From the distance, a figure emerged, mounted on a dark horse, moving with measured grace. Even at this distance, Illy could sense the authority in the man's posture, the quiet command that made the desert itself bend to his presence. Tala stiffened, her eyes narrowing, while Nita's hand drifted instinctively toward her sister's shoulder, a gesture of both caution and recognition. The man dismounted as they approached, boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. His face was lined, weathered by sun and wind, yet his eyes burned with the same fire Illy had seen mirrored in the sisters, a fire of pride, power, and unyielding tradition. This was the chief, the father they had spoken of, alive despite the treachery that had almost claimed him. Illy felt his heart tighten, the full magnitude of the moment pressing down upon him. This was no ordinary encounter. The men he had faced, the battles fought in rain and blood, had led to this, the meeting with the living symbol of the tribe, a man whose approval could change everything. The chief approached slowly, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of generations. When he finally reached them, he knelt before Illy, his gaze unwavering, yet filled with a solemn respect that transcended words. Around them, the valley held its breath, the mist, the dawn, the quiet song of the plains seeming to honor the moment. "You saved my daughters," the chief said, his voice deep, resonant, and unshakable. "You faced fire, death, and the law of men who would see them gone. For this, you are no longer a stranger." Illy's mouth went dry. He had never expected recognition, much less honor from a man of such stature. He lowered his eyes, unsure how to meet the weight of it all. The chief reached into his saddlebag, producing a mantle, rich with patterns of eagle feathers, woven threads, and symbols that marked centuries of lineage. He draped it over Illy's shoulders, the fabric heavy and sacred, its scent carrying the smoke of ceremonial fires. The sisters watched, silent and reverent, as their father acknowledged the cowboy not with words of gold or coin, but with something far rarer, belonging. Illy felt the mantle settle around him, a connection to the land, the tribe, and the storm of destiny that had chosen him. He looked at the sisters, their eyes softening in gratitude and pride. Nita stepped forward, brushing rain, soaked hair from her face, her smile quiet but fierce. Tala's hand lingered briefly on Illy's arm, a silent acknowledgement of trust, of bond, and of the trials they had endured together. The chief rose, signaling the warriors who had been hidden nearby, and they bowed, acknowledging the mantle, acknowledging Illy, acknowledging the courage it had taken to stand where he did. The settlement stirred, voices rising in whispers, astonishment spreading through those who had seen a simple cowboy transformed into a guardian of bloodline and honor. Illy's gaze swept across the valley, from the damp earth to the rising sun, feeling the weight of this reward, not gold, not land, not fame, but something far deeper. A place among the living legacy of a people bound to the land and to each other. And in that dawn, with mist curling around the canyon walls and the scent of sage heavy in the air, Illy Granger realized that courage, when offered without thought of reward, finds its own reward, and sometimes it comes in the form of belonging to something far greater than oneself. The morning mist began to lift, revealing the full expanse of the valley, scorched yet resilient, echoing the night's battle and the lives it had changed. Illy Granger adjusted the sacred mantle over his shoulders, feeling its weight settle not as a burden, but as a mark of something eternal. Around him the sisters stood tall, their presence commanding, yet softened by relief and quiet reverence. The chief's eyes lingered on Illy, unblinking, measuring the man who had risked life and limb for daughters who were not his own. Then, with a solemn nod, he gestured toward the distant settlement where settlers and warriors alike had gathered, their whispers rippling through the air like the tremor of distant drums. "You are one of us now," the chief declared, voice carrying over the valley, resonant and unwavering. "A guardian of our bloodline, a keeper of honor. Let the plains remember your name." The words hung heavy in the air, a weight both humbling and exhilarating. Illy swallowed, his throat tight, the enormity of the moment pressing down on him. He had lived for years with the rhythm of survival, the quiet, lonely life of a cowboy wandering the frontier. But this was something more. This was acknowledgement, belonging, and the forging of a destiny he could never have imagined. Tala stepped beside her father, voice low but steady. "He stood with us when the fire tried to claim us," she said. "He does not falter before the storm, nor before those who would see justice denied." Nita's eyes glimmered, wet with the remnants of the night's rain and the emotion of the moment. "He carries more than courage," she added. "He carries the balance we need, the bond between our people and the world beyond these plains." The chief extended his hand, and Illy grasped it firmly, feeling the strength and legacy behind it. Around them, the warriors lowered their heads, paying homage not just to the chief, but to the man who had dared to stand where others would have fled. Illy's gaze drifted across the valley, taking in the settlement, the scorched earth, and the rising sun painting the mesas with gold and amber. A sense of quiet awe filled him, awe for the sisters he had saved, for the chief who now honored him, and for the vast, unforgiving land that had shaped them all. The chief spoke again, softer this time, almost to himself. "Not with coin or cattle is a man measured, but by the courage he lends to those who cannot stand alone." Illy felt the truth of that statement settle deep in his chest. He had never sought reward, had never asked for recognition. Yet here, in the light of dawn, with the valley alive with whispers of awe and respect, he understood that true reward was far greater than anything he had ever known. The sisters flanked him, their towering figures casting long shadows across the damp earth. The chief raised his hand in final blessing, and the valley seemed to exhale, the mist lifting fully to reveal a world forever changed. Illy Granger, poor cowboy turned guardian, stood at the center of it, the mantle of the Eagle clan draped across his shoulders, the promise of honor and belonging coursing through his veins. And as the first rays of the sun struck the plains, glinting on wet sage and distant mesas, he knew that no gold, no land, no fame could compare to this, the quiet, unshakable bond between courage, mercy, and destiny. The West had just marked him, and he would carry that mark always. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, falling in silver threads over the valley that had known fire and blood only nights before. The canyon, once echoing with the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire, now breathed a tentative calm. Illy Granger moved among the survivors, boots sinking into the damp earth, surveying the land that had been both battleground and crucible. The sisters walked beside him, their injuries tended with careful hands, eyes scanning the horizon with a vigilance born of hard-won survival. Tala stooped to pull a branch from the mud, clearing the path for new growth, while Nita's fingers brushed the scorched ground as if feeling the pulse of the earth itself. The desert was healing slowly, and so were they, all of them. Settlers and tribe alike emerged from hiding, tentative at first, then with cautious curiosity. Whispers spread through the valley like the wind through sagebrush. The poor cowboy who had faced fire, storm, and blood had survived. And not only survived, he had stood beside the daughters of the Eagle clan, becoming their ally, their brother, in arms, their equal in courage. Illy paused at the edge of the field, watching the children of both settlers and tribesmen tentatively approach. Their wide eyes held no fear, only awe, as if recognizing the legend that had walked into their lives. He knelt, letting a small boy touch the mud, streaked mantle draped across his shoulders. The boy's hand lingered briefly, reverent, and Illy felt something stir deep inside him, a quiet pride not born of conquest, but of legacy. The sisters moved among the people, tending wounds, offering words of reassurance, guiding the rebuilding of the valley with the quiet authority that only those who have faced death can command. Their presence was a balm, their strength a shield, and through them Illy saw the truth of his own heart. Courage given freely creates a space for healing, not just for survival, but for life itself. Smoke still curled from the remains of charred brush and shattered tents, mingling with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Illy knelt beside a fallen tree, his hands digging into the damp soil, planting seeds salvaged from the smoke and fire. The land had been stripped bare, but life persisted. The fire had taken much, yet it had also cleared the way for renewal. As he worked, memories of past failures and losses whispered at the edges of his mind, but they no longer held power. The fire, the battle, the blood debt, they had all shaped him, tempered him. He was no longer the lonely cowboy wandering aimlessly across the plains. He was a man tied to the land, to its people, and to the enduring spirit of justice and mercy. Above, the sun broke fully through the clouds, golden light spilling over the valley, illuminating faces worn but unbroken. A soft flute, carried by the wind from a nearby settlement, began to play, the notes threading through the quiet like silver ribbons. It was a song of life renewed, of peace reclaimed, and of stories that would be passed from one generation to the next. Illy rose, shoulders straight, eyes scanning the horizon. The valley was alive again, children laughing, men rebuilding, women tending gardens and fires. And through it all, the sisters walked beside him, silent guardians of the promise that had been fulfilled. For the first time in a long while, Illy felt a sense of home, not in a cabin, not in gold or land, but in the shared heartbeat of life reclaimed after devastation. The fire had tested them, but it had not broken them. It had forged a bond, unspoken yet unyielding, between man and sisters, tribe and settlers, and between courage and the land itself. And as the wind carried the notes of the flute through the valley, Illy knew that though the battle was over, their story had only begun. The sun climbed higher, spilling warm light over the valley, turning drops of rain into 1,000 tiny sparks that danced across the recovering earth. Illy Granger walked among the settlers and tribe, boots leaving shallow prints in the damp soil, eyes tracing the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. Tents were patched, fences mended, fires rekindled, and the first shoots of new grass pushed through the charred remains of the night's inferno. The sisters moved with quiet authority, their tall forms cutting across the mist like sentinels. Tala guided the men in raising a new watchtower from salvaged timber, while Nita oversaw the clearing of debris and the planting of saplings along the canyon's edge. Every movement was precise, efficient, and imbued with the weight of survival, the knowledge that life was fragile, but worth defending. Illy knelt beside a small spring that had survived the blaze, cupping water in his hands, watching it ripple as he lifted it to his mouth. The water was cold, sharp with the scent of rain and stone. He poured a small portion onto the ground, an unspoken offering to the land, a gesture of gratitude and respect. Around him the valley hummed with quiet lifebirds returning to sing among the recovering trees, the low murmur of voices carrying hope, and the faint laughter of children chasing one another through puddles and mud. He caught sight of the children again, their wide eyes tracking his movements, the mantle draped across his shoulders a symbol of courage they could barely comprehend. One girl approached hesitantly, clutching a small bundle of wildflowers. She held them out to Illy, who accepted them with a nod, feeling the simple weight of trust and admiration. It was a quiet, profound reward far beyond the reach of any coin or title. The sisters joined him by the spring, their expressions softened by the calm that had finally returned. Tala dipped her fingers into the water, letting the droplets fall back into the pool, while Nita watched the valley stretch before them, the morning light illuminating the scars of battle alongside the resilience of the land. "The valley lives again," Tala said softly, voice carrying over the gentle rush of water, "and so do we." Illy nodded, understanding the depth of her words. They had all survived fire and blood, betrayal and storm, and yet here they were standing, walking, living. The valley was a mirror of their own recovery, every scar a testament to what had been endured, every new shoot a promise of what could grow. A soft wind swept through the canyon, carrying the faint notes of the flute from the settlement. Illy closed his eyes, letting the melody thread through him, winding around the memory of battles fought and lives spared. In that sound, in that moment, he felt a profound connection to the sisters, to the tribe, to the settlers, and to the land itself. He rose, shoulders squared, eyes meeting those of Tala and Nita. Their gaze was unwavering, their trust absolute. Together they walked through the valley, past the rebuilding homes and gardens, past the quiet laughter of children, and toward the horizon where the desert met the sky. Illy Granger, the poor cowboy who had ridden into fire and blood, now walked with purpose, a man no longer defined by solitude but by the bonds forged in courage and mercy. And as the valley healed around him, he knew that though the fires of the past would never be forgotten, the future bright, resilient, and alive awaited, shaped by the choices he had made and the hearts he had touched. The valley breathed, the wind whispered, and the story of survival, honor, and quiet heroism wove itself into legend, a tale to be carried on the lips of children and travelers alike. A reminder that even in devastation, life could rise, and mercy could endure. The horizon stretched endlessly, a ribbon of gold and violet where the sun sank low, painting the desert with the soft fire of evening. Illy Granger walked slowly, his boots brushing against the tall grasses that swayed in the gentle wind. The valley, once a canvas of destruction and blood, now shimmered with quiet life, reborn under the patient hand of time. The sisters rode ahead, tall and commanding even in the fading light, their figures casting long, graceful shadows across the ground. They moved with the ease of those who had survived storms, battles, and betrayal, carrying with them the unspoken knowledge that the land, like them, had endured. Illy watched them, chest swelling with a mixture of pride and reverence. Their lives, their legacy, had become intertwined with his own. The wind carried faint notes of flute music, drifting from the settlement where children played, voices lifted in laughter and song. It was a melody that spoke of renewal of heart, one piece, and of stories that would outlive those who had lived them. Illy paused to breathe in the air, rich with sage, wet earth, and the lingering sweetness of spring blooms pushing through the once scorched soil. He thought of the battles fought, of blood spilled and mercy offered, and of the mantle draped across his shoulders, a symbol not of power, but of trust, honor, and belonging. The world of men chasing gold and fleeting fame had never appealed to him. But here, in this place where fire had once reigned and justice had been forged, he had found something far more enduring, purpose, connection, and a place in a story larger than his own life. The sisters turned briefly, catching his gaze. In their eyes was gratitude, but also a quiet understanding. They had survived because he had chosen courage over fear, mercy over indifference. And in that choice, the destiny of the valley had shifted, the balance restored, the cycle of destruction and renewal set to continue with them as its stewards. Illy walked toward the fading light, each step measured, grounded, aware of the weight and blessing of survival. The plains stretched ahead, wild and untamed, yet alive with promise. He knew that the scars of fire would remain, etched into the land and into memory, but they were no longer wounds to mourn, they were marks of endurance, lessons carved by experience and courage. Above, the sky deepened into twilight, stars beginning to prick the horizon, tiny beacons of eternity. Illy paused to watch them, letting the silence of the desert wash over him, carrying the hum of life, the whispers of wind through grass, and the faint, unbroken melody of the flute from the valley below. Here, in this quiet hour between day and night, Illy Granger felt the culmination of all he had endured. The horizon of ash and gold stretched endlessly before him, a canvas of both memory and promise. And for the first time in a long while, he understood the profound truth, that courage, mercy, and the quiet acts of the heart are what shape the world far more than gold, land, or fleeting fame ever could. He turned his gaze westward, toward the distant mesas, toward the endless plains, toward the life that waited beyond the edge of fire and shadow, and walked on, a man who had earned his place not by conquest, but by standing steadfast in the face of the storm. The valley behind him shimmered in the soft twilight, alive, resilient, eternal, and Illy Granger, poor Cowboy turned guardian of legacy, carried it all within him, stepping toward the horizon of ash and gold. Years had passed since the valley had known fire and blood. The canyon scars had softened under the patient hands of time. Grasses waved where flames had once roared, streams gurgled where dust had suffocated, and trees stood sentinel over the land, their branches heavy with new leaves. Illy Granger's presence had become a quiet legend, whispered among the settlers honored by the tribe, sung by children who chased one another through the reborn meadows. He walked slowly now, cane in hand, shoulders bent not by fatigue, but by the weight of memory and the years he had earned. The mantle of the Eagle clan lay folded carefully in his cabin, a relic of honor and proof that courage can carve a man's place in the world beyond blood and gold. Each morning he tended the valley, watching life grow where fire had once claimed it, feeling the pulse of the land echo the pulse of those who had lived and fought for it. The sisters remained near, still tall, still commanding, yet softened by time and the peace that had been hard. 1. Tala taught the children the ways of the land, of respect and strength, while Nita shared stories of survival, justice, and courage. Their laughter mingled with Illy's quiet chuckle, a harmony that filled the valley with life, healing even the faintest trace of sorrow. One afternoon, a traveler passed through the valley, dust clinging to boots and coat, eyes wide as he paused at a simple grave near the edge of the canyon. A weathered wooden marker read, "Illy Granger, he rode into fire for strangers." The traveler knelt, letting his fingers brush the earth, feeling the story etched into the soil. Around the grave, wildflowers had sprouted, springing up every year where fire had once ruled, a living testament to the endurance of mercy, courage, and legacy. He looked up at the mesas glowing in the evening sun, the wind carrying the faint hum of flute music from the distant settlement, and understood. Some deeds outlive men, carried in the earth the song, the story. Illy, from his cabin nearby, watched the valley with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his place. He had walked through fire, through blood, and through the judgment of men, and emerged not with wealth, not with titles, but with something far greater, a life intertwined with justice, honor, and the living story of those he had saved. The horizon stretched before him, soft in the twilight, ash and gold mingling where the past met the promise of tomorrow. And as the wind whispered through the canyon, Illy Granger understood the enduring truth. In a world that measures worth by gold and power, one man's courage and mercy can shape eternity, leaving a mark no fire can consume, no storm can erase, and no passage of time can forget. The West had not been built by bullets alone. It had been built by hearts willing to ride into the flames, to stand where others fled, and to turn ashes into legends. Illy Granger's hands, once poor and empty, had shaped the horizon, and in doing so, had become immortal in the quiet, enduring light of mercy, courage, and honor.